It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Should you buy used versus new?
Now, again, Brian, we grew up in Atlanta. There's, Clark Howard was a big radio personality there. We love growing up listening to him. And the conventional wisdom has always been, hey, don't ever buy a new car. Don't ever buy a new car. Don't ever buy a new car. Only buy used, only buy used, only buy used. But as we started studying this and we started looking at this and we started kind of like analyzing, is that true that you should only and always ever buy a used car? We arrived at a different conclusion. I don't know that it's always the absolute best scenario. There are other factors that come into play as to whether you should buy new or should buy used.
Well, I mean, it would be crazy to not mention what just recently happened. In the last year, during the pandemic, all the semiconductor chips, we had all kinds of supply chain issues.
Absolutely.
And so it's not uncommon to have a picture like this that we've got up here if you're watching on YouTube. It's just the parking lot's full of F-150 trucks.
You see any Raptors in there? You see anything?
They are everywhere. So as far as the eye can see, these are brand new vehicles that just didn't have the components so they could actually sell them to the public. Well, this was not just F-150 trucks. This happened across the industry. And you saw crazy distortions where actually used car prices, I've already shared this stat once, where the S&P 500 actually underperformed used car prices because what happened when people couldn't get new cars, it changed the market to where everybody went used. But now that we've got some corrective things going back to bringing us a reversion to the mean, bringing back normalcy, I do think it's important to understand where do you fall in this process? And I think there's a progression. You have to kind of walk yourself, just like we have the financial order of operations that tells you what to do with your next dollar. You have to think about cars in this way, because I don't mind sharing that used cars was where I first started because new cars have gotten so expensive, and I wanted to take advantage of depreciation. Bo, what happens when we talk about depreciation?
Yeah, it's the thing that we've all heard if we've spoken with anyone with a little more wisdom, that when you buy a new car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it is less valuable than it was before you signed the paperwork. And we can see this. This data from Edmunds shows the depreciation of new cars over time, that really the best time to buy a vehicle, all else equal, is somewhere between years 3 and 6, because the value of the car decreases so much in those early years. You literally drive it off the lot and it is no longer worth that value. So the wisdom is, I'm gonna go out and buy a used car. I'm gonna let someone else pay for that depreciation, overpay for that thing, and after it's come down in value to where it's somewhere between 30 to 60% of its new value, that's when I'm gonna swoop in. That's when I'm gonna buy the recently used low mileage vehicle.
So this leads to, because I love, because once again, it goes through our chain of thought of how did we develop the systems we have. So I love, because you see that I can get a car for 40 to 70% at a discount. You're like, man, that is where I'm at. I'm all about that financial mutant life where I'm trying to get as big of a discount as possible. But you will start to notice when you start looking at cars, not all car brands are the same. Is that when we started doing research, and this is something, because I don't mind sharing my used cars that my family was doing. You had the Hondas, the Toyotas, and you start noticing a trend. You're like, wait a minute. These cars, I just showed you a slide where Edmunds said that the typical used car should lose 40% in the first 3 years. But then that's not the case with all brands. If you look at the top 3 on holding their values historically, Subaru, Toyota, and Honda, those all are sitting right around 70% of their value. It's only when you get to other brands that you see those huge drop-offs that we were talking about. Because look at the luxury brands. If you look at Mercedes, Land Rover, and Jaguar, it's they lose like 50%.
I'm sorry, what was that last one you said?
I love saying that because I've listened to so many commercials. It's like the only thing I can say it that way, because my southern accent doesn't allow me to get that coolness on any other word, but I got it on that. But it is one of those things. Pay attention to your brands, because what this is going to do for you when you recognize that you want to buy some of those manufacturers, because maybe you're a car buyer that likes to drive cars for 10 years, because that is one of the things, a financial mutant skill set I want you to understand. People, if you have neighbors that are flipping cars every 18 months, that's not good for your finances. That's actually horrible. Secrets of being a mutant. I judge people pretty hard. I don't like it, because judgment is not a good thing. It's not a good skill set. It's not a good thing.
We draw some conclusions.
But when I see people when I see people flipping cars every 18 months, if they don't work in the car game, that gives me pause, because that makes me wonder, are they good with money? Because a good use of car buying is actually, if you're going to buy new cars, I want you to own them for like 10 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, at least 10 years, because if you can do that, man, you can absorb a lot of things. And it also allows you now to change your mindset from, well, if there's brands that hold 70% of their value after 3 years, that's probably the type of brand or vehicle that instead of buying it used, I'm a good negotiator. I'm good at being a financial mutant. Why don't I go buy that car new, so I know its history, I know what's been done to it, and then I'm going to baby the heck out of this thing for 10 years. This will lead us to maybe you should be more on that new car side of life.
Now, it's interesting, Brian, because one of the things we were talking about in pre-show prep is like when you're making this decision, you got to decide what stage of life you're in, right? You got to figure out sort of where you are, because the way you look at buying cars and making car purchase is different than it was 20 years ago, right? Like you're not in the same position, so you approach it a little bit differently when you think about the reasons why you buy new versus the reasons back then why you bought used. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I don't mind sharing that I didn't buy my first new car until I was 32 years old. So it was not something that I graduated college and then I went out and bought a brand new car because look at me, I'm a college graduate, I got a job. No, I was like, no, you're going to go buy a reliable transportation. It wasn't until I started having some financial successes, I had my ducks in a line, where I felt like I was paying myself first, I was investing, doing what I was supposed to. So me and my spouse got our first new car at age 32, and I'm glad that we didn't do it out of order. We didn't do it in too big of an order, because it does. You need to be very careful that because there's so many distractions, and I've talked about this a lot. I want you to be a builder of wealth, but we live in a consumer of wealth society. So cars are one of those biggest things, because you can live in a beautiful house, but your coworkers don't see your house. The people at the stoplight don't see your house. They see your car, and the advertisers take advantage of that status. I mean, and I remember the first time I went out to California, like the LA area, I was like, what? Because I feel like that, and maybe it's changed, but when I was out in California in the LA scene last, I was like, can these people really afford all these cars? Because they had Range Rovers, like we have Honda Accords back in Georgia. And of course, I moved here to Nashville, and it's a lot of nice cars here. We're not too far from it. So just be careful, because you can get ahead of yourself on buying new when maybe you're not in the stage of life that you should be.
But one of the things that I have found is, I've bought used cars before, and I bought a used car one time, and it was not an expensive car. Within like a few months, I had to put tons of money into it, and it just wasn't the best. What I love about buying new cars is if I'm the first owner, I know what that car's history is. I know what the maintenance is. I've probably got a really good warranty on that. Now, it doesn't inoculate you from not getting a bad car. I mean, we bought a new car in the past couple of years, and it broke down twice in the first 10 months, and we ended up having to get out of that car. But I knew that with my family, growing family, I wanted some of those safety features. I wanted some of the protections. I wanted some of the stuff on the road. So at our stage in life, new car made sense because of those things. But you have to answer that question for yourself. Do I really need to? Are there reasons why I'm buying a new car? Or might a used car satisfy the things that I need for an automobile to satisfy for me?
Well, and I want to put this in context of the financial order of operations. Remember, if you go to moneyguy.com/resources, you can download the free deliverable. If you want the actual deep dive, it's learn.moneyguy. We have the course in the financial order of operations. I think new car purchases really fall into around step 8.
I think so too.
Because it is one of those things where you've kind of laid the groundwork. You've already really comfortably got that 20 to 25% of automatic investment, automatic wealth building going on, that now you've got a little extra, and you're trying to figure out, is this the kid's college, or is this, mommy and daddy get a nicer car? You're trying to figure these type of things out. I would make sure you get your priorities right, so that this isn't a decision that you look back on with regret.